The intoxicating aroma of sizzling meat cut through the peaceful Sunday air like a double-edged sword, one that would simultaneously ignite an unprecedented war within the walls of Villa Verde condominium and forge an unshakable alliance among its residents. As smoke rose from Marco Santos's perfectly maintained Weber grill, carrying with it the promise of a blissful family gathering, it also carried the spark that would topple a tyrannical regime that had slowly been suffocating the very soul of their community. In that moment, as Marco lovingly basted his carefully marinated picanha, he couldn't have known that his simple act of joy would become the catalyst for a revolution that would reshape the lives of everyone in Villa Verde forever. The sound of heavy wooden doors slamming echoed through the building's stairwell like thunder, followed by the distinctive click-clack of expensive heels ascending with military precision. The residents who heard that familiar sound quickly retreated into their apartments, drawing their children inside and closing their windows. A Pavlovian response developed over 3 months of living under what many had begun calling the Regina regime. Even the building's maintenance staff had learned to make themselves scarce when those heels announced her approach, their mops and brooms abandoned mid-stroke as they sought refuge in the service areas. Donna Regina, the newly appointed building manager, was on the warpath. Her perfectly manicured fingers clutched her leather-bound rulebook, so tightly her knuckles had turned white, and her thin lips were pressed into an even thinner line of righteous indignation. The security cameras had caught the telltale wisps of smoke rising from the Santos family's terrace, and she was determined to make an example of them. Regina had spent her entire life in pursuit of order, a compulsion that had roots in her tumultuous childhood. Growing up in a chaotic household with 5 siblings and parents who could barely keep up with their energetic brood, she had found solace in creating her own small pockets of control. What had started as a simple habit of organizing her toys by size and color had evolved into a full-blown obsession with rules, regulations, and the power they gave her over her environment. Her previous career as a corporate compliance officer had only reinforced these tendencies, earning her both promotions and a reputation for being unbendingly rigid. Her own apartment was a testament to this obsession. Every picture frame hung at precisely 90 degrees, every cushion fluffed and positioned at exactly 45-degree angles, every surface sanitized twice daily. Her closet was a masterpiece of organization, with clothes arranged by color, season, and frequency of use. Even her refrigerator contents were labeled and dated, with items arranged in strict accordance with food safety guidelines she had memorized from various regulatory bodies. The apartment itself was a study in minimalist perfection, decorated in shades of white and beige that would have made a hospital room look colorful by comparison. The few personal touches, a collection of certificates and awards from her corporate days, carefully framed news clippings about successful compliance initiatives she had led, spoke more to her achievements in enforcing rules than to any personal passions or relationships. When she had been appointed as Syndica 3 months ago, she had vowed to bring this same level of perfection to Villa Verde. The building's previous laissez-faire atmosphere had offended her very nature, and she had taken it upon herself to correct what she saw as years of mismanagement. She had spent her first week methodically documenting every minor infraction, every deviation from the building's regulations, creating a thick dossier of what she termed community violations. The residents had already begun to feel the weight of her iron-fisted rule. In just 90 days, she had issued more fines than the building had seen in the past 5 years combined. Her zealous enforcement of even the most obscure regulations had created an atmosphere of fear and resentment that permeated every corner of Villa Verde. The building's once vibrant community life had withered under her watch. The weekly card games in the recreation room had ceased after she implemented a complex reservation system, requiring 72 hours notice and a detailed list of participants. The children's play area, once filled with the sound of laughter and games, had fallen silent under her strict noise regulations and time restrictions. Even the traditional Sunday afternoon gatherings that had once brought neighbors together had dwindled as residents retreated into their apartments, afraid of running afoul of her ever-expanding list of rules. Her morning inspections had become dreaded rituals, with residents anxiously checking their doormats, plants, and hallway decorations before she began her rounds. The building's maintenance staff had taken to warning residents of her approach, developing an elaborate system of discreet signals to alert people when she was on their floor. Until now, no one had dared to challenge her authority openly. The Santos family's barbecue would become her crusade, and ultimately her undoing. As Regina burst onto the terrace, the peaceful family scene before her only fueled her rage. The sight of such unrestrained joy, of people daring to live their lives without adherence to her carefully crafted regulations, sent a surge of anxiety through her body. It reminded her too much of her own family's chaos, of the unpredictability she had spent decades trying to escape. The smoke from Marco's grill seemed to mock her efforts at maintaining perfect order, its tendrils reaching out to contaminate the sterile environment she had worked so hard to create. Marco stood at his grill, wearing the cheerful Kiss the Cook apron his daughter Isabella had given him for Father's Day. The apron was well worn, its colors faded from countless Sunday afternoons spent tending to sizzling meats under the Sao Paulo sun. It bore the proud battle scars of countless family gatherings, a small grease stain from last Christmas's feast, a tiny burn mark from an enthusiastic flip of a particularly juicy picanha, even a splash of red wine from his wife's birthday celebration. Each mark told a story, much like the terrace itself. The space had been transformed over the years from a simple concrete slab into a warm, inviting outdoor living room. Potted herbs lined one wall, their fragrant leaves often finding their way into Maria's famous chimichurri sauce. String lights zigzagged overhead, ready to cast a warm glow over evening gatherings. The wooden table, handcrafted by Marco himself during the pandemic lockdown, bore the initials of every family member and close friend who had shared a meal there. His wife Maria was arranging fresh rolls on a table decorated with cheerful yellow flowers, each bloom carefully selected from the local market that morning. The flowers were a tradition of their own. Yellow for happiness, she always said, and plenty of it. While Isabella, their 12-year-old daughter, was carefully setting out plates decorated with bright summer patterns, humming softly to herself as she worked. The scene was one of pure domestic happiness, exactly the kind of chaos Regina had dedicated herself to eliminating. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that made Isabella drop her stack of paper plates in surprise. Regina's designer handbag swung wildly as she fumbled for her phone, determined to document what she deemed a grievous violation of building regulations. "A fine of 5,000 reais will be issued immediately. This is a clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3, Subsection C of the building's regulations." Marco's spatula froze mid-flip as he turned to face the interruption. He was a man of medium build with kind eyes and laugh lines that spoke of a life well lived. His position as a respected high school history teacher had taught him the value of keeping calm in the face of conflict, but even his legendary patience was being tested by this intrusion into his family's peaceful Sunday tradition. Maria stepped forward, her natural diplomacy taking over. She was a successful mediator by profession, and her ability to defuse tense situations had made her one of the most sought-after conflict resolution specialists in Sao Paulo. "Dona Regina," she began, her voice steady and reasonable, "we've been having family barbecues here for 5 years. The previous manager not only approved it, but encouraged community gatherings like this. We have written documentation of this approval." But Regina was beyond reason. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to bristle with indignation as she raised her phone higher, documenting what she clearly viewed as evidence of criminal activity. "Written approval," she scoffed. "Any such approval was clearly issued in error and is hereby revoked. This is a residential building, not a churrascaria. The smoke, the noise, the smell, it's all completely unacceptable." Isabella, who had been quietly gathering the dropped plates, looked up with tears forming in her eyes. "But Dona Regina, we invited Dona Martha from the 5th floor to join us. She's been alone since her husband passed away, and she said she was looking forward to—" "Silence," Regina snapped, causing Isabella to flinch. "Children should not interfere in adult matters. This gathering is over. Clean this up immediately, or I'll double the fine." As Regina stormed off to draft the fine, her heels click-clacking a victory march down the stairs. Marco remained surprisingly calm. He turned off the grill with deliberate care and pulled out his phone. But instead of calling a lawyer or filing a complaint, he did something that would prove far more powerful. He created a WhatsApp group titled Villa Verde Unidos, Villa Verde United. Within hours, the group had swelled to include residents from nearly every apartment in the building. At first, the messages trickled in hesitantly, a few brave souls testing the waters with their grievances. But as more people began to share their experiences, the floodgates opened. The phone notifications became a constant chorus, each ping revealing another layer of Regina's oppressive rule. What emerged wasn't just a pattern of excessive enforcement, but a systematic dismantling of the community's spirit. Maria, watching the messages flood in on her phone, felt her mediator's instincts kick into high gear. She began cataloging the complaints, creating a detailed timeline of Regina's 3-month reign. The sheer volume of incidents was staggering. But even more striking was the emotional toll revealed in the residents' messages. Behind each complaint lay a story of joy suppressed, of community bonds strained, of simple pleasures denied. Regina's reign of terror had affected far more people than anyone had realized. Jorge from apartment 302 had been fined for having a small welcome mat outside his door, allegedly a fire hazard. Ana Sofia from 701 had received a penalty for accepting a food delivery at 10:05 p.m., 5 minutes after Regina's arbitrary cutoff time. Dona Martha herself had been reprimanded for walking her cat on a leash in the garden, despite there being no rule against pets in the common areas. The stories continued to pour in, each more absurd than the last. Regina had fined a young couple for kissing in the elevator, citing inappropriate behavior in common areas. Her detailed report had included timestamps from security footage and a 3-page explanation of why public displays of affection violated the building's moral standards. The couple, both doctors working long shifts at different hospitals, had simply been grateful for a rare moment together between their hectic schedules. A single mother had been penalized because her child's bicycle had been visible on their balcony for more than 2 hours. Regina had documented the infraction with time-stamped photographs and a lengthy citation of building aesthetics regulations. The mother, already struggling to balance work and childcare, had been reduced to tears by Regina's hostile confrontation in front of her neighbors. An elderly resident had received a written warning for humming in the hallway, something she did to help remember her apartment number, due to early-stage dementia. Regina had classified it as noise pollution and threatened escalating penalties if the behavior continued. The woman's daughter, upon learning of the warning, had been so outraged she had considered moving her mother to a different building. The building's maintenance staff shared their own stories of Regina's micromanagement. The gardener described being required to measure grass height with a ruler and submit daily reports. The cleaning crew spoke of being forced to use specific quantities of cleaning products, measured out to the milliliter, regardless of the actual needs of different areas. Even the doormen had thick binders of procedures to follow, with infractions meticulously documented in Regina's flowing handwriting. As the community shared their experiences, something remarkable began to happen. The fear and isolation that had characterized Regina's reign began to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of solidarity. People who had lived as neighbors for years, without really knowing each other, were suddenly united in their desire for change. Marco, watching the conversation unfold on his phone, felt a familiar spark of excitement. As a history teacher, he had often taught his students about how communities throughout history had united to overcome oppression. Now he was about to become part of such a story. The next morning, Marco officially contested the fine and called for an emergency building assembly. The announcement went out through multiple channels: the WhatsApp group, printed notices in the elevator, and even old-fashioned door-to-door notifications spread by eager volunteers. The building buzzed with anticipation, like a courtroom before a landmark verdict. The preparation for the assembly became a community effort in itself. Residents from each floor coordinated to ensure everyone could attend, offering to watch each other's children and pets. Senora Teresa from 502, who hadn't left her apartment in weeks due to mobility issues, found herself surrounded by neighbors offering transportation and support. Even the normally reserved Mr. Chun from 801, who worked night shifts and rarely participated in building affairs, rearranged his schedule to attend. The turnout was unprecedented. Every single unit was represented, with some families bringing folding chairs to accommodate everyone in the building's meeting room. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as Regina took her place at the front, her rulebook prominently displayed on the table before her. Dr. Paulo stood at the assembly, his decades of legal experience evident in his commanding presence. The constitutional lawyer had spent the entire night reviewing not just Villa Verde's regulations, but also countless case laws and property rights precedents. His home office had become a war room, with sticky notes covering his walls and legal text spread across every surface. "None of these fines have any legal backing," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of both professional authority and personal conviction. He methodically laid out his findings, presenting a devastating legal critique of Regina's actions. The building's convention explicitly allows for reasonable recreational use of private terraces, and there's no specific prohibition against barbecues. Furthermore, the arbitrary nature of fine amounts violates consumer protection laws and basic constitutional rights. He proceeded to dissect Regina's entire system of governance point by point. The security camera she had installed without proper consent violated privacy laws. Her arbitrary curfews for deliveries contradicted municipal regulations. The restrictions on children playing in common areas went against both the building's own charter and child welfare provisions in Brazilian law. But beyond the legal issues, he continued, his voice softening, there's a more fundamental problem here. A building manager's role is to serve the community, not to rule it. The very word syndica comes from the Greek syndikos, one who helps in justice, not one who imposes their will. As Dr. Paulo continued his analysis, Regina's composed facade began to crack. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed an increasingly nervous pattern on her rulebook as he methodically dismantled her authority. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, and more residents stood to share their experiences. Dona Martha, the elderly widow from the 5th floor, spoke about how the building had become a cold, unwelcoming place under Regina's management. "I lost my Alberto 6 months ago," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "The only thing that kept me going was the kindness of neighbors like the Santos family. But lately, I've been afraid to even leave my apartment, worried that I might break some rule I didn't know existed." As the meeting continued, it became clear that Regina's actions had affected more than just the residents' daily lives. They had struck at the very heart of what made Villa Verde a community. Young parents spoke about how their children had become anxious, worried about making too much noise while playing. Elderly residents described feeling imprisoned in their own homes. Even the building's maintenance staff shared stories of being berated for minor infractions, like humming while working or taking too long to clean a specific area. Regina attempted to defend herself, citing obscure clauses and regulations, but her words fell on deaf ears. The assembly voted overwhelmingly, 45-1, to remove her from her position and annul all pending fines. The lone dissenting vote was, of course, her own. The moment the results were announced, a palpable wave of relief swept through the room. Some residents wiped away tears, while others embraced their neighbors. It wasn't just a vote. It was a reclamation of their home, their community, their right to live without fear. In that moment of collective victory, something remarkable happened. The invisible walls that Regina had built between neighbors began to crumble. The young couple from 601 invited the elderly gentleman from 602 to dinner. The teenagers who had been afraid to use the community room planned a movie night. Parents who had been keeping their children indoors began discussing a playground renovation project. It was as if the building itself was taking a deep cleansing breath after months of holding it in. The following day, as Regina gathered her belongings from the manager's office, the full weight of her actions finally seemed to sink in. Each item she packed was a reminder of her failed mission to reshape Villa Verde in her image. Her precious rulebook, now dog-eared and worn, seemed to mock her with its rigid certainty. The framed certificates of her management courses, which she had displayed so proudly, now felt hollow and meaningless. As she methodically emptied her desk drawers, she found something that made her pause. A Christmas card from the previous year, signed by dozens of residents. It had been given to her predecessor, a warm reminder of the community she had tried so hard to reform. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the messages of gratitude and affection, each signature representing a person she had turned into an enemy. The sound of children's laughter drifted in through the window, a sound that had once sent her rushing to issue noise violations, but now served as a poignant reminder of the joy she had tried to suppress. For the first time since taking the position, Regina allowed herself to question whether her pursuit of perfect order had been worth the cost of human connection. She encountered an unexpected sight in the lobby. Isabella stood there, holding a plate covered in aluminum foil. The girl's eyes, which had held tears of fear just days before, now showed only compassion. "My dad wanted you to have some of the barbecue you missed," Isabella said, extending the plate. "He always says that everyone deserves a second chance, and that sometimes the best way to understand someone is to share a meal with them." Regina stared at the plate, her carefully maintained facade crumbling completely. For the first time, she saw beyond her rulebook and regulations to the human cost of her actions. She had come to Villa Verde determined to create perfect order. But in doing so, she had nearly destroyed something far more valuable. The sense of community that made the building more than just a collection of apartments. Without a word, she took the plate and hurried out, leaving behind not just her position, but also the valuable lesson that management without compassion is merely control, and that rules without reason serve no one. The following Sunday, the smell of grilling meat once again wafted through Villa Verde, but this time it carried a different significance. The aroma wasn't just that of perfectly seasoned picanha or succulent chicken hearts. It was the scent of victory, of community restored, of freedom reclaimed. From multiple terraces, smoke rose into the clear Sao Paulo sky like victory flags, each tendril a testament to the residents' resilience. The transformation of Villa Verde was evident everywhere. The once silent corridors now hummed with friendly greetings and casual conversations. Plants appeared outside apartment doors, small acts of personalization that would have earned hefty fines just days before. Children's artwork decorated the community bulletin board alongside the building notices, adding splashes of color to what had been a sterile space under Regina's rule. The new building manager, elected unanimously by the residents, had her own barbecue going too. She was everything Regina wasn't: approachable, flexible, and most importantly, understanding that rules existed to serve the community, not suffocate it. She had already begun work on a revised set of building guidelines, created with input from residents of all ages and backgrounds, focusing on fostering community while maintaining reasonable standards. The rulebook still existed, but now it served the community rather than controlling it. On Marco's terrace, the gathering had grown into something approaching a small festival. Dona Martha sat in a comfortable chair specially brought up for her, sharing stories about her late husband with Maria and anyone else who stopped to listen. Her tales, once confined to the loneliness of her apartment, now found an eager audience. She spoke of Alberto's legendary feijoada, of their dancing days, of the life they had built together in Villa Verde. As she talked, her eyes sparkled with a vitality that had been dimming under Regina's reign. Isabella had transformed one corner of the terrace into an impromptu cooking school, teaching Jorge's kids how to make brigadeiros. Their hands were sticky with chocolate, their faces dusted with cocoa powder, and their laughter carried across the terrace like music. The simple act of children being allowed to be children felt like a revolutionary act. After months of enforced silence, Dr. Paulo had brought his famous pão de queijo, made from a recipe passed down through generations of his Mineiro family. As he shared the story behind each ingredient, he also shared his vision for Villa Verde's future, a community governed by understanding rather than fear, by connection rather than control. Ana Sofia's homemade caipirinha was being praised by all the adults, its lime and cachaca freshness a perfect complement to the warm afternoon. As the sun set over Villa Verde, The sound of laughter and clinking glasses echoed through the building. Marco's Terrace barbecue had become more than just a family tradition. It had become a symbol of community triumph over tyranny, of compassion over control, and of the power of unity in the face of unreasonable authority. The story of the Syndica Exagerata would be told and retold at future gatherings, each time serving as a reminder that true community is built not through rigid rules and harsh penalties, but through understanding, compassion, and the simple act of breaking bread, or in this case, sharing churrasco together. In the years that followed, Villa Verde became known throughout the neighborhood as a model community, its transformation so complete that visitors often found it hard to believe the stories of Regina's reign. The incident had taught them all a valuable lesson about the delicate balance between order and freedom, rules and relationships, authority and compassion. But more than that, it had shown them the true meaning of community. New residents were welcomed not just with formalities and paperwork, but with warm embraces and invitations to weekend barbecues. The building's common areas, once sterile and silent, buzzed with life at all hours. Children played freely in the newly renovated playground, their laughter a constant reminder of the victory won that fateful Sunday. The garden, once regulated down to the height of each blade of grass, flourished with a managed wildness that made it feel alive and welcoming. Even the building's staff had been transformed by the change. The maintenance team, no longer afraid of being reprimanded for every minor infraction, took pride in their work in a way that showed in every polished surface and well-tended plant. The doormen, freed from their role as Regina's informants, became true members of the community, knowing each resident by name and greeting them with genuine warmth rather than nervous vigilance. The security cameras that had once served as Regina's eyes and ears now simply did their intended job of keeping the building safe, no longer tools of surveillance and control. The building's WhatsApp group, which had started as a rebellion, evolved into a vibrant community forum where residents shared everything from maintenance updates to recipes, from babysitting offers to book recommendations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, residents would gather on their balconies or in the community room to recall the time when their simple Sunday tradition had sparked a revolution of kindness. The story would be told with different emphases depending on who was telling it. Some focused on the drama of the confrontation, others on the triumph of community organizing, and still others on the deeper lessons about human nature and the power of compassion. The children of Villa Verde grew up hearing various versions of the tale, and as they grew older, they began to understand its deeper meanings. They learned that rules without reason were merely restrictions, that authority without empathy was just power, and that true community was built on understanding and mutual respect rather than fear and control. Isabella, who had played such a pivotal role in the story's conclusion, developed a particular interest in community organizing and conflict resolution, inspired by the events she had witnessed. In her university application essay years later, she would write about that Sunday afternoon when she had offered Regina a plate of churrasco, and how it had taught her that sometimes the bravest act of resistance was an act of kindness. The legacy of that Sunday afternoon lived on not just in the regular gatherings and shared meals, but in the very fabric of daily life at Villa Verde. The building's new charter, drafted with input from all residents, began with a simple but powerful statement. A community is measured not by the rules it enforces, but by the connections it fosters. These words, elegantly framed in the lobby, served as a daily reminder of the lessons learned and the values they had fought to protect. Even Regina's story had an epilogue. Years later, some residents reported seeing her at a neighborhood cafe, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a book about mindfulness and emotional intelligence. They noticed that her perfectly manicured appearance had softened somewhat, and that she smiled more easily. While no one approached her, many liked to think that she too had learned something valuable from her time at Villa Verde, that perhaps she had finally found a way to balance her need for order with an appreciation for the beautiful chaos of human connection. And if anyone happened to pass by Villa Verde on a Sunday afternoon, they would still smell the intoxicating aroma of churrasco wafting through the air, no longer a symbol of rebellion, but a testament to the enduring power of community, compassion, and the simple joy of sharing a meal with neighbors who had become family. The end.